Hello, everybody. Today, I am so delighted to have my very good friend, Mairead, with us. So, you won't know who Mairead is, and I suspect she's glad about that. But Mairead was actually my therapist. Now, you might think that's strange, or you might be extra interested. The reason why I've asked Mairead to come and be in conversation with me today is because Mairead and I have been on a journey together. One of the biggest questions I get from people who follow me, especially women who've experienced trauma, who've had difficulty in their childhood, who've come through addiction themselves or with their family, they ask me about how I've healed. And sometimes I tell them I went to therapy. Most of the time I tell them I went to therapy, but they don't really know what that means or what happens in therapy. And over the years of my life, I've actually tried and stopped therapy many times. And sometimes it was because it was the wrong person. Sometimes it was the wrong time. But I just thought, why not just get someone here who's an expert to talk about what happens in therapy and how you heal from trauma? And also maybe I can use some of my story in this conversation to highlight some of the things that happen in a good therapeutic relationship. But Mairead is nervous. And I'm kind of glad she is because, it shows that she has, I suppose, boundaries and fears and like all of us. So thank you so much, Mairead, for agreeing to do this. Do you want to firstly just tell me a little bit about yourself and just maybe why you became a therapist?
Why I became a therapist? Because I was never in therapy myself.
Yes.
I think it was that I was always tried to help.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. I think we've talked about that before as well.
Yeah.
Is that you've always had that kind of drive to help people.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it's probably fair to say that I was always the person who would park the time.
Yeah. And like in my case, like I did psychology, Mairead, because I was interested in like why people are the way they are. Not necessarily in helping them. That sounds terrible. I do care about people, but I was more interested in, and psychology is very like science focused, and it's all about like measurement and kind of like trying to like predict why people do what they're doing. And I loved that. I loved the science of behavior, but the psychotherapy side of it, like actually being in a room with somebody and trying to help them. Like I love to help people. Didn't necessarily attract me. And I think we've talked about it before, like you like helping people.
Yeah. And I think kind of psychology is more of a, as you say, it's a measurement that you're assessing somebody.
Yeah.
Based on certain criteria.
Yeah.
Like how do you score on this? Like how do you rate this? Or
yes.
Whatever. Whereas psychotherapy, there's no real, there are no diagnostics.
Yeah.
It's just, here you are.
Yeah. And that's interesting because lots of people do ask me about, they ask me for career advice. They come to me and go, how did you become, because they hear Dr. O'Sullivan, he's a psychologist. How did you, and a lot of people actually don't want to be a psychologist. They actually want to help people. And there's a big distinction. And sometimes I think people go into psychology thinking, I don't want to put psychologists down because some psychologists, what you do in a psychology degree is you do 4 years or 3 and you learn how to measure behavior and how to analyze data, and you learn a lot of theories about human behavior from all the different schools. But then if you want to go and treat people or help people in terms of their psychology, you go on and do a master's and become like a clinical and counseling psychologist. Whereas psychotherapy is a completely different route. You can just decide, I want to work with people and immediately, but you still do some of the stuff where you understand behavior though within the psychotherapy degree. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and in psychotherapy, like certainly even in the training that I did, you're looking at lifespan development even from before people were born.
Yes. Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like as in, I'm interested in the context, like when you came into the world even.
Yeah.
What was going on?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Do you get me? Like, the early, this is in psychology as well, obviously. Like, what was your attachment. What was
Yeah.
life like with your primary caregiver? From the get-go, you're looking from day one.
Yeah.
And, ideally, you will have a very attuned parent. And when you look into your parents' eyes, they will look back lovingly to you.
Yeah.
And they will, imprint into you that you're so valuable and so welcome and,
Yes.
you're the most important thing in the world.
Yes, exactly.
And then, okay, let's talk about the ideal situation. So you will learn an awful lot about yourself. And this is pre-verbal, that I am a valuable person.
Yeah.
I am loved. I am safe. All of those things. And then, ideally, then this attunement and care continues, and you go to school, and then you're good at everything, and you make really good friends, and your teachers are great. Nobody puts you down, and then so it continues, and you have this lovely attachment with your caregivers. You've a great, wider acceptance and value and all that kind of stuff. And then you go on and
have a great life.
Have a great life.
And that's like, so in terms of your college life, so when you were studying psychotherapy, you would have kind of learned then that kind of what the ideal kind of scenarios for optimal development is, what we'd call it in psychology.
Yes, exactly.
But in terms of when you were doing your training as a psychotherapist, Mairead, because I think some of us who, it's like a black box. When you go to we hear words. I'm a psychologist and I've learned about some of the things that even you talk about. But going to therapy is a different thing, because I don't know the differences between the different approaches even. So like someone will say integrative or someone will say psychodynamic. And I'm just like, is this just going to work for me? Like, is this going to make me better? And so when you went to training, did you learn like about human development and then how to help people in different ways from a developmental point of view?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I think any therapist is a composite of whole range of modules. Do you get me?
Yeah.
Our training would have been, my training was humanistic integrative.
Yeah.
So the humanistic part of it would be based on Carl Rogers.
My favourite, by the way.
Really?
Oh, I love Rogers, yeah. The reason I love Rogers is because Rogers believes that humans are inherently good.
Exactly.
And I believe that I'm inherently good. And I think all of us know that we're good and that somewhere inside of ourselves is a good person waiting to come out.
Absolutely.
And so for me, Rogers, all of the other stuff, I just heard, he thinks that we're good. Because there are theorists who actually think that we're all kind of driven by dark forces, or not dark, but like there's other drives that drive us. So for me, Rogers was really nice and humanistic.
Yeah. And exactly. Yeah. So that's the core belief, as you've explained really well, Katriona. And then the idea is that given the core conditions, that if you can sit down with somebody who can, be respectful of you, have lots of empathy and respect, and I think there's about 8, and I can't remember all of them.
Yeah, but, it's okay. It's not a test.
Basically, yeah, sure. But the
8 conditions, like,
exactly.
Is that right?
I think there's about 8 of them. But if you can be there and really hold a space for somebody, and really, so your client can experience empathy and respect and unconditional positive regard.
Yeah. I love that though, Mairead, because like the work of Rogers said that we all experience conditioning. All of our worth is and I talk about this in my own work, how when you go to education, particularly, whether you're good or bad as a person is often dependent on your performance in school. Sure. And we're taught that. So that's one of the conditions in the West, is that if you do well in school, you're good, you're clever. And that's it's not unconditional. So you're not good or clever unconditionally. You're good or clever based on how you perform in school. So like all of us, irrespective of like the love of our families or whatever, experience conditions in our life. And some of them can result in pathology, like a real sense of, because if you fail then at the thing, which is for me, I was taught in school that if you're clever if you do well here. And because of the conditions of my family, I couldn't achieve the way everybody else could. And so I felt like I was a failure and I wasn't very good because of the conditioning. And in therapy, so in our therapy, I would have experienced, I kind of feel, sometimes I want to cry when I talk about it, but that's okay. Like one of the core things I think for me healing with you was that you were always on my side unconditionally. It wasn't like you kind of like agreed with anything bad I was doing necessarily. Do you know what I mean? So it wasn't like you were like, yeah, do that, even if it was hurting me. But there was this continually unconditional positive regard for me as a human being that wasn't dependent on my performance in things. And so that's what you're talking about, isn't it? The therapy that you learn in terms of Rogers or unconditional positive is to provide that platform in therapy for somebody.
Yeah. So where it's a safe space where you can be all of you.
Yes.
Do you get me?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about we're messy as people.
Yeah.
Do you know? And we're not always the best versions of ourselves.
Yeah.
And in your case, say for instance, as I recall, you came to me first because you were falling out with people, Katriona.
Yeah. I was falling out with people. Just to say that though, Mairead, people don't come to therapy because people come to therapy often for something different than what happened to them.
Absolutely.
So in my case, I really wanted to be loved and really wanted to be able to maintain relationships with people. And I couldn't. I could with Dave and things were good, but in terms of my friendships, I found it really, really difficult. I'm a reactor or was a reactive person. And some of the reaction was historic, from my history. So you present to therapy with what's happening today.
And
exactly.
And I do recall it really clearly.
Yeah.
Because certainly the first session with somebody, I'm hypervigilant.
Yeah.
I'm watching everything about you. I'm watching how you are in the chair, how you're breathing, how you're, it's an awful lot more than what you say. And so my first experience of you, Katriona, I remember it very clearly. And it was just, you were I don't know, conducting an orchestra of heavy metal bands. No, really.
I was.
Yeah. And it was on here, and here,
I know.
and here. And the ceiling really well.
Yeah. I would look you in the face.
No, not at all. And so my sense of you, you were an orchestra. And then on closer inspection, it was this beautiful woman here is firefighting.
Yeah. That was it.
Okay. And firefighting on so many levels. There was a great sense of emergency about you.
Yeah.
That everything was an emergency. And so in that I was going, whoa, there is a hell of a lot of trauma here.
Yeah.
Okay. So this, Katriona, that she reacts.
Yes.
And almost in fight or flight mode.
Yes, all the time.
All the time, yeah.
But that's how I was.
Yeah.
And it was I remember arriving, because all of us want to live a good life.
Yeah.
I firmly believe that every single person is born to grow towards the light. And some of us have darker shadows that stop that growth, or we grow out of shape but we all want to be standing up tall, like all the good trees.
Yeah.
And so it's really, really hard when you want so much to be good, to not fight, to love, to feel connected. And yet there is other things and it stopping you from doing that. And in my case, I felt always there was something something was going to happen. And it was never something exciting. Like I wasn't waiting for Santi to come. It was like something bad was going to happen. And I think when you're on like that all the time, you notice bad things more, or you're ready to fight immediately. And in my case, like I came to you because I literally was like, I know that in here, inside of me, is a good person, like who can actually connect. And I wanted that so much, but I also knew that there was something stopping it. And it was like, I think a lot of people, it's like a hum in the background going, there's something not right here, with you.
That's a very good way of putting it, actually. Yeah. Or, some rumbling undercurrent.
Yeah.
That had you in that. But like, remember from when you were little, I mean, that's why your fight and flight, Katriona, that's why you survived.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the great thing about therapy with you, Mairead, was because I do have the tendency to be very hard on myself for not being perfect, for not being better. And it was always wonderful that you would always reframe. So in our interactions, you would always reframe the fight or flight response to a positive. And I don't mean as in a positive, but you would always say, sure, like, look at you, look how far you've come. Like you needed you needed that.
Exactly.
Which was a wonderful thing, because I think most of us who have trauma and reaction and broken relationships and an inability to complete things, or whichever way the trauma manifests, it just becomes a cycle of feeling bad about yourself all the time. Yeah. And without somebody to talk to who's trained and specialist, that just becomes a constant cycle of like, I am a failure. It is true. These deep doubts that I have are true. Yeah. And like coming to you and being able to kind of allow that relationship develop, you were able to kind of put a chink in that cycle with me, and not just say, oh, you're not bad. You're not bad. You were actually able to say, Sharon, isn't it amazing that you're here?
Yeah. Exactly. Like, so what you would, the problem with trauma is that you're literally inhabited, you're in your amygdala, you're like...
Yeah.
And your access to your executive functioning isn't great. Yeah. Let's face it, because you're trying to survive.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah. So I think in the work, you would have been, telling me particular situations and how you reacted. And generally you would have been working out of your amygdala. Then a bit later you can go back into your grey matter and reflect on it. And then you would be kind of going, oh my God, it's awful.
I know. But there was times where, so I think when I say about the hum, Mairead, that the part of me that would have been like, is this me? Was this me? I think most people who find relationships difficult and find it difficult to be consistent or be the person they want to be in relationships, you'll have a situation happen, like you'll explode on someone, which I would have done, or you would have lost a friendship. And in the fire, you're going, it was them, and they did this, and then you're looking for the evidence that it was them. And in my case, I had that a lot, but I also had a little tiny hum of a voice that was like, maybe this is something to do with you. Yeah. And not like in that like real accusatory voice, but more so like my spirit, I think, or like what Maslow or what Rogers talks about, is the good in us that actually wants us to be completely free. And so, coming to therapy, and just for people listening, I think it's really important that if there's patterns in our lives that are harming us and stopping us achieve what we want, then the healing obviously comes from getting rid of like any harmful person or thing in our lives, but also from like looking at our own self, listening to the little voices that are in there.
Exactly. And I think there's, I didn't come up with this myself, but if it's hysterical, it's historical.
Yeah. Oh, I love it.
It's great.
Yes.
That if you find in your life that you are... I don't think it's fair to say overreacting or, but if you have a disproportionate response to a situation.
Yes. Yeah.
Then it's worth a look.
But sometimes you don't know it's disproportionate.
Yeah.
Like sometimes so there was a period in my life when you talk about the amygdala. So we talk about, so for people that don't know, there's like brain processes that are involved in trauma, that in living actually. So the amygdala is the back of our brain, and it is the part of our brain that tells us that we're in danger and then directs what we should do. Yeah. So if there's a lion coming, the amygdala will fire and say, run, and it'll connect to the front of our brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, and that will direct our behavior and tell us to move. When someone's traumatized, usually the amygdala, the back of the brain, is flooded, loads of chemicals, and you're always thinking that there's going to be a lion attacking you, but it's not a lion. It might be an adult or a person or an event. And also the connection between the front, which is the controller, is often broken. So the controller can't actually accurately stop us from acting in ways that we don't want to act.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like hijacking. Imagine hijacking a plane.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
And it's like that because, we're hardwired to survive.
Exactly. And I think years ago, Mairead, like say if in my early 20s or my late teens, my late teens, early 20s, there was no reflection piece then.
Yeah.
It was all react. And also it was all trying to numb it.
Yeah.
So, because we've talked about addiction, I know we're just jumping into it here, loads of different conversations, but, like I came to you, obviously with what was going on today, but with a lot of history around my relationship with my parents and also then trauma and that the connection between them too. So like what we would call it is complex trauma.
Absolutely.
Very complex.
Yeah.
But we would have talked a bit about what people who've trauma, like so when we talk about my man, for example, because Tilly would have been in our conversations a lot over the time, and I would have gone through an awful lot of like healing around her, but we would have talked about how numbing through drugs or drink or sex or violence or whatever it is very common in traumatized people. And as a late teen and early 20s, I definitely didn't even have a reflection. I just had like a reactive brain that I was always on and I needed to numb. And so like in terms of addiction, Mairead, would you say it's quite common for people who've had addiction to have trauma and to have experienced it?
It's extremely likely.
Yeah. And when we talked about my mum, I suppose you were very gentle, but very good at kind of, because one of the things that people always say about my book is this: you're so forgiving about your mum and your dad. And I'm like, I'm understanding like 7-year-old me is never going to be okay with what happened to me. It's never okay that a child is neglected or not heard or seen. But I understand why. And I think our relationship actually helped me with that. So like in terms of like understanding, I suppose, people who are not treated, who are walking around in the world, like how do you do that, Mairead? How do you teach people about that?
Teach people
about like addiction. Like I suppose in our relationship, we would have talked about my mum and said, we would have said a lot about, well, what did she have?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it would be about learning about how Tilly was resourced.
Yeah, that's what
Do you know that it wasn't that she wouldn't parent properly. It was that she couldn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know? And it was nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
But...
and as a therapist, is it hard to hold that space for people, Mairead? Like between like validating the person's own experience and then also framing, like talking about their parents' experience as well in the same breath. Is that hard for you? Or it felt easy.
Yeah. Is it hard for me? Well, like the hard bit was absolutely being with 7-year-old Katriona, if you like.
Yeah.
And that's why I got the doll, know?
Yeah.
And like that was partly for me too. Sometimes it was very difficult to listen.
Yeah.
To all of, how your needs were not met.
Yeah.
Across the board. And when I bought it, I know you said a cringy doll.
I know. No, it's not cringy now.
Not cringy now. But it was almost like, this is how, she's a little rag doll and she's really little pretty thing and,
Yeah.
you know, nicely dressed and her hair is done.
Yeah.
You know, that didn't happen for you.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen for you because the people in your life were not resourced. Okay, to do your hair before school and to pack your lunch and, you know, to affirm you and do all of those kind of things. And but, you know, they weren't resourced.
And that's been, I suppose, for me as someone, like it's the client or someone who come in, it was so powerful for like the way in which you would have kind of taught me that in therapy. Because therapy's sometimes more than just like, oh my God, my childhood was so bad. I think like that's a really important thing to say as well. Like a lot of my friends would resist therapy because they say, I don't want to feel the pain.
I know.
But like they feel the pain today of not resolving the pain
I know.
of yesterday.
And it's almost like, this sense like, oh my God, if I open that up,
I know.
you know, I will be engulfed. Do you know? And I suppose that's the thing about therapy, that's not the way it rolls.
No, it isn't.
You know?
It isn't. You don't spend the whole time like going in and talking about your 7-year-old self the whole time.
No.
Like in my case, it would rotate between today, yesterday. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I'd be driving down to go to Mairead's and I'd be like, oh, I'm dreading this today. I don't want, because you know, it's hard.
Fair, Katriona, because it is hard.
Yeah. So back to the types of therapy that we use, okay? So that's what we do. We go off on tangents, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But like one of the words that you used was integrative. And before I went to therapy, right, I thought that integrative meant that you had a self, your own self, your psychological self, and then you had bits of yourself that were outside of that you had to go into therapy and integrate together. And but when we were talking about this, you were saying to me that actually no, like integrative is like where you use different therapeutic methods and you integrate them together. So like one time we were in therapy and Mairead has like sandboxes because she does, not always for the adults, don't be scared. She has younger people that come in as well. So she has sandboxes and so sometimes I remember like one time Mairead was like, okay, do you want to put your feet on the ground and breathe? Because obviously I'm looking up to the ceiling and I'm firefighting. And I was like, oh no, I don't like that. I don't like to be in my body. And then another time you had these two little animals, like I was having difficulty in a relationship and you were like, do you want to maybe put the voice of the person in this animal and and I did try it and I was doing it, but in my head I was like, this is so fucking cringy.
Yeah.
But and then you brought in the doll, little Katriona. So Mairead one day introduced this little doll and she said, I'm just going to sit her over. I'm going to cry when I think about her. I'm going to sit her over on the chair. She has an extra chair in the room. It's a little doll and I'll put a picture up. And she got pigtails and everything. And she had a lovely dress on. And you were like, this is you when you were small. And I think we should have her in the room so that you can be aware of her. And it made me cringe, but also like, I just felt this like really deep sadness in a way that I hadn't felt for myself before.
Yeah, and so did I.
Yeah.
You know, that I think, hands up, so did I.
Yeah.
And I think how I was motivated to go and get little Katriona, you know, because it was my wish for you to reclaim the value of that little girl who felt, I don't know, just, you just, across the board, Katriona.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and what really angered me was that people who were paid to help didn't help.
Yeah. I always, it's like I knew, I felt that like in the therapy, I felt that you were, you were on my side. So
absolutely.
For anyone who doesn't know my story or hasn't read my book, you know, my book is about my life. Like I went through significant poverty and trauma, but also like I talk about how the people who could help me, how they didn't, and the people who could help me, how they did, because there were people that did. So I talk about, you know, ambulance men and social workers and other people, police, but also in my relationship with Mairead, there would have been other people that would have talked about that's not even in the book. And so it was nice, I suppose, for us together to be able to for me to feel that you're on my side with that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when you're like the loss of my childhood, there's a couple of losses, a few actually, but the inability to choose to be good for me was my first loss. As in, I remember being really small, Mairead, and like the teachers wanted me to behave like everybody else. And I remember I used to in the morning be getting ready and be like, I'm going to be a good girl today, like all the good girls. And then an hour later, I'd find myself like throwing a chair or saying fuck off or fighting with a kid because I couldn't regulate. I couldn't regulate myself. The trauma had meant that like my brain, but also my physical capacity to control myself was gone. So like that was what was stolen from me. But also, I suppose, the trust in the world was like this. The other hum was that nobody's going to come for you and nobody cares.
Yeah.
And so when we would talk about, you know, my mum and dad and stuff, like you were great at like contextualizing their lives and allowing me to forgive them, but not accept it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But with the other people, like the people in the services, there were many times we were like, they shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, no, and I honestly, I remember feeling really angry about that. In one sense, I think in therapy, you actually get the opportunity to grow up all over again.
Yes.
Do you think?
Yes. 100%. Or grow up for the first time.
Yeah.
In my case.
Yeah, no, it's just something that has been said to me probably many times. You know, that, you know, in finishing up with somebody, it's been said to me a lot. I feel like I grew up all over again with you.
100%.
And then, you know, and then they become really good parents to themselves. To get me? Yeah.
That's the gift of therapy.
Yeah.
So we talked about, so the other day I was talking to Mairead about this. I remember being like, so I saw Mairead regularly and I would recommend that if you really want to heal, that you go regularly.
Yeah. You have to commit to it. And I think that has to be the first inquiry with yourself. You know, am I prepared to commit to this? Because let's face it, Katriona, it's not magic.
No, it's not magic. It is work, but it is great work.
Yeah.
And the outcomes are long lasting and life changing.
Yeah.
In my case, they're life changing. And I remember so you go to therapy, you start with what's happening today, then you begin to talk about the past. Now, one thing I just wanted to cover for people is like sometimes the first session can be the hardest session in some therapy, with some therapists. If the therapists are listening, I would say to you, please don't make them tell you everything on the first day. Like I remember going to this one woman and like she had this list of questions and it was like, were you ever abused? Did your dad ever drink alcohol? Did your mom ever hit you? Every single thing that ever happened to me in my childhood was asked within an hour with a complete stranger. And I remember feeling so like the power dynamic is there. So she's in a position of power because she's the therapist and I'm looking for help. And so I feel like I can't say no to these questions or I'm uncomfortable. So an hour of the deepest, darkest secrets of my life. And then I walk out and I'm like an open sponge. And I think I'm never doing therapy again. That's not the right way to do it, is it, Mairead?
Certainly not the way I would do it.
Yeah. So tell us what you would do on day one.
Well, on day one, I am very cognizant of the fact that nobody's like cheering on the way to me. You know, they're not coming to tell me about their fabulous holidays or how great their lives are. They're coming to me because they're having difficulties.
Yeah. And,
you know, they're coming because there was a point in time where they said, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so I'm very aware of that already it's intimidating. Okay. And so I'm going to make it as cozy, if you like. I don't know if that's not the right word, but
yeah, but that is welcoming, and cozy. It is cozy. The room's really cozy as well, just so you know.
And like loads of plants in the hall.
Loads of plants in the hallway.
And I have and Avoya fragrance.
Avoya fragrance, yes. It's very. It feels a little bit like you're entering a Dare Manor. I'm only joking.
Stop. I'll take that, Katriona.
I know. She's loads of books in the background as well of the therapy room. So it's great if you don't want to look your therapist in the eye. You can just...
I've loads of distractions. Like a lot of therapists now, they just have the chair and the table and the clock.
Yeah.
And the tissues.
And the tissues. The tissues so embarrassing.
Oh,
yeah, I know.
Yeah. But whereas mine is very different to that.
It is. Yeah. You're the first session. So with us, it was just...
Oh, sorry. Going...
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like, what brought you here?
Yeah. And and that's really nice because you don't have that intense feeling because like the fear of therapy is they're going to ask me all about my childhood and I'm going to have to tell them everything, and then they ask you all about your childhood and you tell them everything in an hour and then you're left with that horrible feeling and the shame of that, and so it's really off-putting.
And like one thing I'm very passionate about is that people are consumers about therapy.
Yes,
in the way they would be about anything else.
Exactly. And that's, they should be. They should be consumers. Like ask questions.
I'm never taking out my diary after the first session to write you in for the next one.
Yes.
So what I encourage people to do is, you know what, after when we finish up the session, I'll say, do you know what, how about you go and have a think?
Yeah.
About how safe you felt with me. Did you feel I gotcha?
Yeah.
Because this is really important.
Yeah. And you did that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because time and time again, I'll have somebody coming to me and, well, I went to this person for, I'm not joking, Katriona, 3 years.
I know.
And you're kind of, you know what? No, I didn't really get anything out of it. And I'm like, what?
I think that was we had this conversation recently. We went to a conference together on trauma and we talked about like the length of time that people could be in therapy and kind of like people heal. Mm-hmm. Like that's my message.
Yeah.
Like you can heal. Like you don't have to suffer forever, and you don't have to stay in therapy forever either. Like, our relationship has ended in terms of therapeutic. We're friends now because like I'm healed. There's loads of healings happening now, and there's loads of, I suppose it's not that. So in my case, the feelings, the depth of the feelings, the sadness that I have sometimes, the trauma, the responses, some of them are still there, and I wrote about that. But what I have now, and we've talked about this, is like I have an internal parent, like a part of myself now that knows how to manage when I have the reaction. When now I might not always follow what the parent is saying, but the majority of the time I have this other self-reflective piece. So like healing is possible. We've talked about this before, that some people feel like they have to stay in therapy for years and years and years, and they don't. Like it can come to an end.
Oh, absolutely. And nobody would be staying in therapy with me for years.
I know. She pushed me out. No, she didn't.
No, I did not. No, I didn't.
She didn't.
No, but I am, exactly. Healing is the prize. I don't ever want anybody to be dependent.
I know. On the therapist.
I'm my wish for you is that, as you said, like that you can be that good parent to yourself.
Yeah.
Or that good therapist even to yourself. You still have maybe the same reactions. You're not going to change the past.
Yeah.
But you get to change your relationship to the past.
Exactly.
Whereas, you'll always have triggers, Katriona.
Yeah.
But then you can identify them like, all of these feelings are coming up because these awful feelings have been triggered. But then I get to go, hang on, what's the actual situation in front of me?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, you can get into your reflective space.
Yeah. And that is the gift of therapy.
Yeah.
Is the moment.
Exactly.
Is the space.
And the way like I bleat on and on and on about recovery time.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's whereas maybe when you came to me first, you could have been like, oh my God, Mairead, like for the week. Yes. I was.
Yeah. And then.
Whereas now it can be 10 minutes.
I know. It's some of the amazing things that have come from being in therapy with Mairead. Like there were a couple of I suppose sometimes in life you can feel like you have eureka moments. Mm-hmm. But often eureka moments, we know from science, are actually accumulation of actions that come together in a moment where we realise we know something.
Gotcha.
And in my case, I remember being in therapy with you, Mairead, and I would have very strong feelings about certain things. Like I'm a strong feeler anyway, okay? Yeah. Always was from a very small age. But I'd have like, if I felt shame, Mairead, in any way, it would be like so deep. Like it would really be like a really strong feeling. Like it would actually debilitate me, and I'd feel like completely overwhelmed by certain feelings. Same with sadness, and same with like injustice, or you know. And I remember being in therapy with you at one point and saying, Mairead, why can't I just be okay? Like, why can't I just feel these feelings and be okay? And I'll never forget you using this analogy of like a reservoir of feelings, and you just said, Katriona, some people have deeper reservoirs of experience. And so if you drop a stone into them, the ripples are bigger. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong. It just means that you have to be aware of that. It was like mind blowing to me, because I'd never really considered that. I'd always just thought there's something wrong with me. But what we did together, and you did, was you kind of helped me reframe my feelings and actually have a bit of compassion for myself, that like the depth of the feeling that I had was connected to my childhood, and it was okay. Can you talk about that again, Mairead? Because I can never find the right words, but you always, well, maybe you can't say it again in the way you said it.
I think you did a great job. And you know, I'm very visual.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's how I conceptualize it. You know, that we all have reservoirs of feelings.
Yeah.
And say, going back to like dum-de-dum-de-dum, if you had a great time, you know.
Yeah.
You're not going to have, like, you will not have picked up shame along the way.
Yeah.
So if somebody says shame to you, you might go,
yeah.
Whereas, you know, because you might have imagine an egg cup of shame in your life, whereas you have an ocean of it.
Yeah.
Do you get me?
Yeah.
So that person who has the egg cup reservoir, if they're come into it, you know, where they're embarrassed or something, they'll probably laugh. And they're like, oh my God, I'm scarlet. Like,
yeah.
Whereas for you, you know, to trigger something, or you come across a situation where you might have felt, oh, didn't like that, embarrassed. You know, you have this, you know, an avalanche of stuff can happen for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know? And in a way, you know, ultimately, I love the idea of transformational trauma.
Yeah.
You know, it's really great at fostering empathy in a person. Do you know?
Exactly. And like, because I wouldn't recommend trauma to anyone. I don't think anyone should live through trauma ever. One trauma, horrific traumas, whatever. But I do actually sometimes see that it's a bit of a superpower for me sometimes, because if I'm not reacting from it, then it allows me to really see some people and feel them.
Yeah.
And also the hypervigilance piece really allows me to read a room
in
a way that other people wouldn't. You know, people who don't have that, like, or who are not looking for danger, they don't notice like slight changes in a room. Like I talked to you this about before, like I teach a class of 300 kids. Mairead, like I'm aware of every single one of them kids in the room.
Oh,
like,
I know.
if someone's on their phone, I'm like, get off your phone, row 13, 2 steps in, because I notice it, you know. But that was a real pivotal moment for me, was actually realizing that the feeling, the depth of the feelings was okay.
Yeah.
And then also it gave me, because I think the goal of therapy was always to have a space not to react on the feelings, was always to be, and I didn't know that going in, but like was to be able to manage my feelings.
Yeah.
And I remember recently I was driving, I had an argument with somebody, and I was driving and I could feel, because what happens to me is I get like physically, I can feel the feeling all over my body of like fear and rejection and oh my God. And then I want to fix it, and I'll fix it by either ringing them and fighting with them or like whatever. And I remember I was driving along and I just had this thought, you can manage your own feelings. You can hold difficult feelings.
Hooray.
I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable.
Wow, get me.
I know. But I'd never had that before.
Yeah.
It was always a case that I have a difficult feeling and get rid of it somehow. Either ring someone, shout, fight, or run away, or self-medicate. Whereas in through the work that we did together, I was able to sit with a really difficult feeling. Like, this person doesn't like me and is not unhappy with me. And so that to me, that's the difficult feeling, Mairead, because like, it would really kick up like my relationship with my dad, like him, you know, the fear that he was going to take his love away from me, all that stuff. And instead of having to like get it out, get rid of it, I just was like, I can manage this.
Oh.
Which I think is something that, having explored and talked a lot with you.
Yeah, no, I love hearing that. You know that.
But that's the gift of therapy, I think, is the ability to reflect. Is to be able to hold your feelings and actually not react. Is that right? Is that what you're...
No, absolutely.
Yeah. And is that what you're aiming for?
Absolutely, the self-regulation piece.
Yeah.
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 And what else am I after? Reclaiming self.
Yeah. Yes.
Do you know?
Yeah.
And that you become, you become compassionate to yourself.
That is the hardest piece, I suppose.
You found that really hard.
And I do still find that hard sometimes.
Yeah.
I do. I'm not as... It's not as much the compassion piece. It's because one of the other pivotal moments within therapy for me was I would do this. Something would happen and I'd have a really dark feeling. So say, for example, I don't know, me and Dave would have a fight, or Dave would do something and I'd feel like I needed to stand up for myself, but I was afraid if I did, he might leave me, or all of so I'd have these really dark kind of doubtful feelings about myself or my life or something. And instead of in that moment asking somebody for help when I'm vulnerable and I feel really scared and alone, I would wait until it was past. I'd hide, wait until it was past, make a plan, and then talk about it afterwards.
Yeah.
And you talk about recovery time. Sometimes like I would be in that for a week or two.
I know.
And I wouldn't maybe come to a therapy session. I'd be like waiting for it to pass before I could actually head out into the world again. And like living like that isn't good, because I have a job and I've kids and I've myself to commit to, and I couldn't. The feeling would be so strong that it would stop me going out into the world. And I remember being in therapy and you saying to me, you can call me, you know, when you feel like that, because that was the worst thing. That was the saddest thing, is that I'm going to cry. I never felt like anybody.
I know. Yeah. Anybody was there
for me.
Yeah.
And and you would have been encouraging that.
Yes. And I couldn't make it.
No.
Do you know, because like that's the thing. You had to have that day, Katriona.
Yes. I remember having the day. So I didn't call Mairead. It was between sessions, because I'd always think I'll save it up for the session. I won't call her, because I don't want to this is not what you do in therapy. You don't call your therapy midweek.
Yeah, but like I would have known you wouldn't be calling me because you're having a bad hair day.
Yeah.
Or you got clamped.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, to be fair, Katriona, I would know that you were calling me because you were in a really, really dark day.
Yeah.
And that would be very much, part of our therapeutic relationship.
Yes.
That when you're coming to me, you have decided to commit to a therapeutic relationship with me.
Yes.
I'm there for you.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
And, I found nobody abuses it.
Yes. But it was scary. Like, I suppose one of the other things that was robbed from me through my childhood and through my life was the belief that people were good and reliable.
Yeah.
And so you saying to me, I'm here, that's been said to me before. Like, my dad would have said that at times, or my mum would have, or people in relationships, and then they wouldn't be there. And so it's not easy to believe that. And I remember the first time I would never ring. I would just text you. I'd be like, I am struggling right now. And you'd be like, you can give me a ring if you want to. And then I'd like, no, I'm fine now. That's okay. Because I sent the text. But I felt really good about sending the text, because I was like, I would never do that.
Oh, no, I think I punched the air, Katriona.
Yeah. You did.
I actually think I punched the air.
Yeah. You were so proud. Like when I got to session the next time, you were like,
Oh, I was like,
I'm so glad that you did that. Yeah.
yeah, I felt so proud of you.
Yeah. And then I did it again. And then I actually called you. I remember I was away on holiday and I was really struggling. Like the recovery time wasn't there. Like I was really down on myself, really wasn't feeling good about my body, out in the public, having to be like, because I like my home comforts, Mairead. Like I like my own bed, I like my own husband, I like my own kids, my own, especially like that's the stuff that actually helps me be with stability is my own space. And being on holiday is a really tough space for me sometimes. Yeah. And I remember ringing you from holiday and I've texted you first and then you were like, you can ring me, And this time I just said, I'm going to ring. And like it literally.
Yeah, that's the thing. It was, we probably talked for 15 minutes. Katriona.
Yeah, I know. But it broke it.
Yeah.
And then at the end I was like, do I owe her money now?
As a matter of fact.
No.
No.
But yeah.
No, but then like again, that's, there is a prize for both therapist and client.
Yes. So
I think that's important. So that'd be a prize for me that I as well. I'd be very proud of you, but I'd be going, yes.
Yeah. Because it's a sign of healing, I suppose.
Yeah. That you can ask for support.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Because like we all need support. We all need love and support.
Yeah.
Don't we?
Yes, we definitely do. Yeah. And it's getting to that point of being able to ask for it. Yes. And I suppose we talk about little Katriona, I went from in the therapy. So when we talk about integrative therapy, different types, like having the doll. So having the doll in the room was really helpful to me. So like my book, I dedicated it to 7-year-old me.
I know.
And I say, I got you. But that I got you comes from actually the therapy that we did together. Because that doll was 7-year-old me. And she went from sitting in the chair to sitting on my knee in therapy.
I know.
Sometimes I just hug her. Yeah. And some of you might think this is weird. But like I needed a visual of myself. I needed something, a reminder of myself at that age that I always need to be nurturing that part of myself. And in Mairead's trying of the different things, the sandbox and the breathing, and the doll was the technique that worked for me. Is there a name for that, like in therapy? Or is there a name for like when you use like dolls and stuff? There probably isn't.
Whoops.
No. Some theorist is like
inner child work.
Yeah, inner child work.
Yeah.
And like, just so you know, little Katriona sits on my bedside table and every day I look at her and tell her that I'm there for her because I think it's really important practice for me to keep bringing her into my mind in the morning. But I was away, I think it was last Christmas. And I saw this little ballerina doll. And I was like, I would have loved, because I didn't have any dolls as a kid. I didn't have toys. We didn't have food, for God's sake. And I brought this little ballerina for my doll. Aww. And I remember texting Mairead, I took a photo of it and I texted Mairead and I said, I just brought this for little Katriona. And so in my bedroom is me and sitting on her knee is a little doll for her, which is really nice.
That's beyond gorgeous, actually.
It is. Now, please don't think I'm weird. I'm not weird. I'm just like into healing in whatever way works for me.
Absolutely. And do you know what? It's not, that's a thing. Therapy is definitely not one size fits all.
No.
Do you know? Like I work with everyone differently. I think.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I go into her room, I'd be looking at the things because, like, when you're not looking at the therapist's eye, I look at all the dolls and the toys and the things. She has this sandbox. I'm like, I wish I was smaller.
I know. And I do art with people and sometimes movement.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah. We've tried. Well,
like to come and, shake it out and stuff. And
it's really good.
Yeah. Like, I'd like to think, I'm quite spontaneous and.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. And, creative maybe.
Yeah, it's nice to do that. Last of 2 questions left. How do you so supervision for therapists, like, what happens there, Mairead? Like, so when I would give advice to people who ask me about looking for a therapist, right? Usually I just give them your number, to be honest. But if it's not that, if they're in the country or wherever else they are, I will say, you know, make sure you check that the therapist is registered with the Therapeutic Society. I can't remember the name of it. Make sure they have a good qualification. Check their qualification. Ask them that because it means that you value yourself, but also ask them if they're in supervision. Now, I would ask that question, but I actually don't have a clue what happens in supervision. So I have this kind of mythical idea that you're in there with your supervisor going, and Katriona did this, and I don't wonder if there's some other therapist.
You're like in supervision, you're talking about yourself, Katriona.
Yeah.
You know, and if you have, say, if you're kind of, say, for instance, in your case, you know, when you were bringing out the book, you know, back then, and the only thing I would have been talking about myself. I would have just been saying, I wonder if I feel overly protective, you know, what's going on for me in that.
Yeah.
No, you're talking about yourself, really.
Yeah. And why is it important to have supervision, Mairead?
Well, because like that, you know, real feelings happen in therapy.
Yeah.
Do you know? And it's important that, like, you know, if you don't have supervision, sometimes you get caught up in the mix of it, you know, of what's yours and what's the client's. Do you get me?
Yes, of course. So it's not all about me, all everywhere else.
No, Katriona, I have not been talking about. Sorry.
What's the hardest part about being a therapist, Mairead?
The hardest part?
Yeah.
What's the hardest part? You hear very difficult things, Katriona.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, you hear some man's inhumanity to man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you stay positive with that?
How do I stay positive with it?
Yeah, how do you stay positive?
Goes back to that idea that people are inclined towards wholeness.
Yeah, towards
and
good.
These are, you know, whoever's sitting in front of me, they've survived everything. And they are bigger than their pain. And I know I can help, Katriona, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the, you know, like, God, this is awful. But you know what? You're going to be, you know, you're going to be brand new.
What advice would you give to people who are considering therapy, Mairead? Like, who are struggling with trauma, let's say, or with addiction, or if they're struggling, do you have any words of advice for them people?
There is a right person for you. Okay?
Yeah.
And that's, you know, I would go back to being the consumer about therapy in that.
Yeah.
You know, go and find your person.
In therapy.
I think so, yeah.
So I'm just going to end on this. So I just want to say thank you, Mairead, for being a wonderful therapist. I know that I had to work. And so for anybody who's thinking, but it's good work. Like, the gift of therapy is not only do you get to connect with a person in a room and you have someone on your side and you feel validated and vindicated at sometimes, but it's also in what it's done in my life. Like, I can hold eye contact now.
I know. Like,
there's people I work with, honestly, there would have been times where I would have had to, like, actually have other people present in meetings and stuff because I would have been afraid of my inability to control my reactions. Whereas that's not there anymore. Yeah. I'm actually able to actually even name and say, actually, you know what, I'm having a reaction here to this conversation that's nothing to do with today.
Yeah.
So it's really worth it. I hope that you got something out of this conversation. You've learned a bit about what we did. But just to end, say thank you, Mairead, for being someone that has helped me become the person I was meant to be.
Oh, Katriona, can you just imagine how that feels for me? And I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. And you worked so hard.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, and you did. And you stuck with it, girl.
Yeah. Thanks, Mairead.
All right.